Enigma Ledger of Ancestry is the new Mystic Illusionist from part the Mistveil. Using a combination of attack and defense with her ward aura synergies, her goal is to outvalue the opponent throughout the game, helped by big attacks and disruption. She wants to establish a board state at multiple points, getting extra value from keeping her auras around until finally cashing in on their ward at the right moments. And with new and reasonable cards like Manifestations of Mistveil, Restless Coalescence, and Levels of Enlightenment, Enigma is the most fair and balanced hero ever released. And because of how fair and balanced she is, playing her is the most fun I have had in Flesh and Blood in a very long time. Sorry, Prism, there's a new waifu in town. This is my fair and balanced Enigma deck tech. To go over this deck, I'm going to break it down into different sections, starting with the equipment, then going over the auras, attacks, transcends, defense, the sideboard, and finishing off with a few cards that could very well make their way into the deck as I tinker some more. At the time of making this video, part the Mistveil just came out, so the deck is far from being finished. However, I have been loving this hero, and I feel like even with this early iteration, the deck is very strong and can do some incredible things. So let's get into it. This deck is built around Enigma's signature weapon, Cosmos Scroll of Ancestral Tapestry. It turns your ward auras into weapons with power equal to their ward, lets them attack for one resource, and gives any aura with +1 counters go again. This pairs incredibly well with Enigma's ability to create a spectral shield with a counter on it, especially since she makes your first shield attack essentially free. For the armor, we've got the Traverse the Universe in our head slot, which lets us fetch out a chi, which is incredibly powerful as it enables an on-demand Mirror Guy or Unravel Aggression. For the chest, we're running Fandel Spring Tunic for the extra resources, our arms are Uphold Tradition to help with counters on our auras, and the Meridian Pathways are our feet, but it's mostly just a block 3 later in the game when we pitch a chi on our opponent's turn, although it can also help you play a Shimmers of Silver before an attack. We do also run some sideboard equipment with 3 Arcane Barrier pieces being the Crown of Reflection and the No Rune Robe and Gloves. This lets us have AB3 as well as keeping the Meridian Pathway open for Kano's combo turn. And to finish off the equipment, we've got the Phantasmal Footsteps to bring in against go wide decks like ninjas to help keep our auras around just a little bit longer. And speaking of auras, Enigma's bread and butter is using her ward auras to apply pressure, attempting to keep them around to get extra value on them, before eventually giving them up for the defensive value. The auras we're running are Waxing Spectre, Rage Spectre, Phantom Tidemaw, and the perfectly fair and balanced Restless Coalescence and Manifestations of Mistveil. Starting with those powerhouses, these are the 2 key cards in Enigma's strategy. Restless can transfer counters onto itself, attack for a 4 or 5 with go again, and then on each player's turn, remove a counter to make a shield at instant speed. This card is just so unbelievably fair and balanced, it's incredible. Getting to make shields on both players' turns makes it a lot easier to deal with small attacks like Double Strike, and if you can manage to keep the Restless on the field, you can abuse it even more by putting extra counters on it. But the other card that abuses counters is Manifestations of Mistveil, which comes in with 2 counters when played with a normal pitch, or 4 counters if you pitch a chi. Getting ward equal to its counters is insanely powerful, as if you put 4 counters on it, it swings for 8. Put more on it with your arms, Shimmers of Silver, or Astral Etchings, and it will snowball out of control very quickly. Manifestations of Mistveil is the most balanced and fair powerhouse of the deck and should not be left out of any list. Another aura that can stack counters on itself though is the Phantom Tidemaw, a 0-cost blue instant that has Ward 1 and Phantasm, which, makes it a worse attack than the others. However, this card not only enables your transcends, but also stacks counters on itself whenever an aura pops. This card goes really great with the Restless Coalescence, since you can make shields with the Restless, let them pop to throw counters on the Tidemaw, then play another Restless, transferring those counters onto it. This makes for a very powerful synergy that can help the deck spiral out of control very quickly. Waxing Spectre, on the other hand, is less flashy, but still a really solid card. Pitching a blue lets you attack for 4 and ward 3, which is a 2-card 7. And if you could transfer that counter to a Restless, it's even better. There's nothing flashy about this, but it's just a consistently good card. Similar to that is Rage Spectre, which can be a 2-card 7 if you have no auras on board when you play it. Now, I'll be honest, 99% of the time it's a blue block 3, but sometimes you play it and you swing for 6 and you ward 1, so it's still worth running in the deck. Now, while that's it for the ward auras, we do have a couple of Spectre auras, Haze Bending and Shimmers of Silver at 2 copies each, and another card that synergizes with our counter strategy that I mentioned earlier in the video, Astral Etchings. Haze Bending gives you a shield when your first non-token aura is popped each turn, and Shimmers gives your first aura you attack with a +1 counter. Both of these offer continuous value over the course of a game, and both synergize very well with the rest of the deck when they're on board. They can be a little clunky to play at times without the Meridian effect, and a lot of the time you're just going to be pitching them. However, if you can land them and they stick around, you will get insane value from them. And finally for this section, we've got the red Astral Etchings that I mentioned earlier. This card puts 3 +1 counters on an aura with ward and can be played at instant speed when you've got a Spectral Shield on board. This card works great with Restless Coalescence, but it's also incredible if you can stick the counters on Mirror Guy, as the +3 is actually a +6. And I don't think I need to explain why that's good. I will admit though that this card is a little bit greedy, and sometimes you're just gonna be forced to block with it because you don't have a shield. But considering that's what half our cards do anyways, I don't think that's really a big deal. But that is it for the aura portion of the deck. Now it's time to look at the attacks that we'll be running to back those auras up with. While Enigma is far from filling her deck with attacks, you do want to run some, especially since there's been a growing amount of damage can't be prevented in the game. The 4 I've chosen to run in this build are Command and Conquer, Miraging Metamorph, Battlefront Bastion, 3 reds and 2 blues, and the brand new, very fair and balanced Levels of Enlightenment. Command and Conquer is easily the best disruption piece in the game, effective against some of Enigma's worst matchups like ninjas and rangers. Being 2 cost does mean sometimes that you'll be wasting a resource, but if you've got an aura with counters already on board, Command and Conquer can be a great follow-up to the aura's attack. It's just an all-around fantastic card and helps us both protect our board and come back after it being wiped. As for the Miraging Metamorph, this card is a clean 1 for 7, meaning it can be played as its own attack off of Tunic, or as a great chain ender if you swing with a couple of auras. And while it does have Phantasm, it will copy one of our auras when it's popped, which helps us retain some of the value on the attack. Next, we've got the Battlefront Bastions, the best new common from part the Mistveil by a mile. This card is a simple 3 for 7, but it has the awesome ability that when it blocks alone, it also prevents the next 1 damage. Essentially, this is either a 3 block on 1 attack, or it splits its block up, making it perfect against things like Double Strike and the Assassin Daggers. The reds are fantastic to use on offense and defense, while the blues are really good for that defense as well, but they also serve as our resources. And finally, there's Levels of Enlightenment, or B-Strike as it's been christened by the community. And the B in B-Strike stands for balanced, because for each blue you pitch, you get to pick one of its abilities, those being Go Again, Draw a Card, and give this attack +2. And while getting all 3 abilities is incredible, even just giving this Go Again and drawing a card is pretty damn strong, and this isn't even that difficult to pull off, as you can pitch a blue to attack with this and respond with a Transcend card, pitching it to Enigma and getting to choose 2 modes on the B-Strike. But if you have the right setup, you can potentially get all 3 triggers, making this card even more fair than it already is. Speaking of responding to things with those Transcend cards, let's take a look at the ones that we run in this deck. Transcending is a very important mechanic for Enigma, as it's required for multiple cards and abilities. Because it's so integral to the deck, the Transcend cards we're prioritizing are the ones that are easiest to activate. The best 3 are Rising Sun, Setting Moon, Homage to Ancestors, and Stir the Pot, as they can all be activated immediately after playing a blue with no other requirements. Passover and Preserved Tradition, on the other hand, do require cards in the graveyard, but considering that typically happens on the very first turn of the game, these are typically also free to transcend. A little more difficult than the other 5 is a Drop in the Ocean, which gives an attack -1, meaning that we usually want to pair it with a blue defense reaction or another Transcend card on the opponent's combat chain. It's definitely the worst of these, but still fine enough, as we just want to make sure that we have enough Transcend options. And the last of these is the Enigma Specialization, but not Specialization for some reason. I don't know, maybe they just didn't want Shiana to use them, but either way, we're running the Sacred Art Immortal Lunar Shrine. This card does cost 3, but if you play it after another blue, it gives you 2 shields, a +1 counter on all of your ward auras, and it transcends, giving you the resource to attack with your board state. This card is definitely weaker into decks that can wipe your board every turn, but it's still a solid card to help reestablish your board. And it can very much help you abuse Restless Coalescence, a card that you all know by now is incredibly fair and balanced. But while we're on the topic of board states, we should discuss how to defend it. The one upside to Enigma's auras having ward is that we get the chance to protect them by not taking damage. The downside to this is that we have to protect them by not taking damage. And so this is where the defense portion of the deck comes in. Starting off, we've got the very original and creative choice of running both Sink Below and Fate Foreseen, since 0 for 4 is just too good to pass up. Then we're running Hold the Line, since it's a blue pitch, blocks 5 against heroes like KO, and synergizes with the Drop in the Ocean. But closing out the main board D-Reacts is 2 Unravel Aggression. This card is basically a blue unmovable, but if you pitch a chi for it, you draw a card. While using a chi for this is inconsistent, it is very powerful when you activate the Meridian Pathways as well while you pitch the chi, getting 8 block and replacing the Unravel. But even if you do pitch a normal blue to this, I mean, it's not the worst. Like, it's not amazing, but I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do, right? Most of the time, you're just gonna use this pitch anyways. And then to round out this defensive package, we're running 2 great blue block 3s in This Round's on Me and Warmonger's Diplomacy. This round's is great against ninjas, as it gives a blanket -1 to all of their attacks. Because of how wide they go, giving them an extra card doesn't usually add up to as much damage as you're preventing. Plus, this rounds on me is a blue with Go Again, making it a great transcend enabler. Warmongers, on the other hand, doesn't have Go Again, but it shuts down decks like Azalea and Aggro Viscerai, which are pretty difficult for Enigma to beat. Both of these cards make it into the main board because even if they're not useful in every matchup, they're a blue block 3, which is integral to making this deck work. However, you do need to shore up your bad matchups a bit more, so that's where we're going to go into the sideboard for. The sideboard for this Enigma deck is something I've tinkered around with a bit, but it's obviously going to be constantly in flux with the changing meta, so feel free to add whatever helps you in your local meta. My main two concerns with building this deck were Rangers and Ninjas, as things like Dominate, Blood Rot, and 2,437 attacks on a single combat chain are pretty difficult for Enigma to deal with. For Azalea, we run 2 red unmovables in our vain attempt to block the 8th arrow in a row coming in for 14 Dominate. But that's actually it for Azalea. Command and Conquer and Warmongers are in the main board and they do help with her quite a lot, but there are other cards you can run into her, which I will mention in the last section of this video. Most of the focus in my build was for Ninja because, quite frankly, Zen kind of scares the shit out of me. So a combination of That All You Got and Dense Blue Mist are in here to help with him and any other Ninja deck. I'll be honest though, That All You Got has just been okay, but not amazing in my experience. Dense Blue Mist, on the other hand, has actually been pretty solid since you can play it off a Tunic and new to your opponent's turn. Obviously, the best case is shutting down an Art of War turn, but even the average 4 or 5 card hand from a Ninja deck can go 4 or 5 plus cards wide when you include their weapons. And the final card in the sideboard is Spectral Manifestations, a card that gives you a Spectral Shield and puts 3+1 counters on it if you have no other Illusionist auras. This card is in here to swap out with the Astral Etchings against decks like Ninjas, Rangers, and Runeblades, where you likely won't be able to keep a board state for more than a turn. The one big downside to this card is that it's only a 2-block, but it pairs great with the card that just pairs great with everything, Restless Coalescence. Just be careful in playing your Spectral auras when running the manifestations, as it won't give the counters if they're on board. Chances are, if you're facing a hero like Zen, they're gonna pop your Spectral auras anyways with the Tiger at the end of their chain, so you probably weren't gonna play them anyways. As we wrap up this perfectly fair and balanced deck tech, I do want to mention a few cards that I've got my eye on. The first is Phantasmaclasm, which I was running for a while, but ultimately swapped out for Command and Conquer. While it definitely has the downside of being poppable, getting to force your opponent to tuck the best card in their hand to see what the next turn will look like is really strong. And against decks that might not have too many poppers, it is a 2-card 9 that disrupts their hand on attack. That ain't bad! Like, people are way too quick to dismiss the Clasm, I'm telling ya. Another card that I am going to try is one that Noah Clark, aka Dark Odious, used in his PQ plus Montreal list, Dissolve Reality. This card is a great tech piece for Azalea and Riptide, and I might remove the That All You Gots for it, since Arsenal Disruption is also good into pretty much anything. Also, I just want to quickly say kudos to Noah for taking down both the Battle Hardened and the PQ plus in the same weekend. That is one hell of a feat, and he really displayed the power of Enigma beautifully. If you want to go watch him tear it up with this hero, I will link the stream below. It's incredible to watch. However, before you go watch that, the last card I've been looking at trying is Lost in Thought. Being able to rip an attack from your opponent's hand and replace it with a Ponder token is just another bit of disruption that helps keep your board safe from being wiped completely. It's also not uncommon to have an extra resource since you have Tunic, and pairing this with the CNC is pretty much going to shut down your opponent's turn. Not being a blue does kind of suck though for this deck, and so I'm not sure if it fits, but I do think it's worth testing. But that is it for this fair and balanced Enigma list. I have been thoroughly enjoying playing this deck, and I feel that while it does have some bad matchups and people are definitely going to run counters to it, it is capable of very powerful things, and I really love playing with board states in this game. I feel that Wardors are the best kind of board states, as unlike Spectra, they don't end the opponent's turn, but also unlike the Dragons and Angels, you can actually protect them. It's like the perfect balance of agency between the players that feels really good to play, at least from the Enigma side. Because with cards as balanced and fair as Restless Coalescence and Manifestations of Miragai, how could you not love this deck? But you know who else I love other than Enigma? My patrons. You guys are the absolute chadliest of gamers, and I truly appreciate your support. Huge thanks to the Giga Chad Saint, Geeks First, Elixir, Vinny, Smokeopotamus, John, Ty, James, Chemical, Bryant, Transient Fire, Dark Memoria, and Big Hungry. Then we've got the Alpha Chads Thomas, Zajima, and Pavel. And finally, there's Super Chads Bruno, Thal, Cece, Eric, Ben, and Yogbadoodles21. Thanks again as always, and stay chadly, my friends.